Just a heads up before we get into the episode today that this story is not going to be fun. This is another one of those top 10 worst stories you're ever going to hear on this podcast. So, just keep that in mind. Still probably not as bad as David Parker Ray. So, if you made it through that one, then, you might be all right with this one. But just a warning, because it's going to get bad. It's Our Weird World.
Our Weird World.
Welcome to Our Weird World. I'm your host, John Henson, and this week we are looking at the story of Fred West. A lot of times he gets lumped in with his wife, Rosemary, who was equally as terrible, but Fred was kind of the leader in all of this. Oh boy. Yeah. You know what? You know how it's going to go. I can't prepare you enough for this. It's story time. Story time. Fred West was born on September 29th, 1941 in, I think it's Muchmarkel, but maybe it's like Muckmarkel. I don't know. British stuff. Dumb. I'll say Muchmarkel, knowing full well that some of you who know British history are like, it's not Muchmarkel. Whatever, I don't care. In Herefordshire, on the western side of England. Fred was one of 8 children, but was always considered his mother's favorite, which is shocking considering how his life would turn out. He and his family worked manual labor on their farm as well as seasonal work for others in town just to earn a living and get by. And while everything looked fairly normal on the outside, inside the West home each night was just a completely different story. Fred's father regularly had sex with his daughters, which made Fred feel like all of it was just how family life worked. Like on the surface, you hear that and you're like, oh my God, that's awful. Well, that's at least what you should think. If you thought something, if you thought like, oh yeah, that's pretty sweet and you've got problems and you should, go get help. But, imagine just growing up in that environment, especially, you live on this farmhouse, you don't really interact with other families and your dad's just, going from room to room, banging all your sisters. Like you think that's just how life is. And it's really messed up. Fred, because because he wasn't allowed to diddle his sisters, he actually enjoyed going out to the barn and having sex with animals. And, who knows, maybe his parents made him think that was just a normal thing to do. As a teenager, Fred just kind of lacked the general decorum you might expect from an Englishman. We think that English people are so proper and very polite, and Fred was not any of those things. He openly walked up to girls and just fondled them in the street. He was characterized by others as a country bumpkin. That's one of the phrases that was actually used to describe him, and I didn't realize that was a thing in England. I just thought, all English people were the same. Some people have like a Cockney accent and that's kind of considered white trash there, but I just thought all British people were just like very proper, and that was not the case. Apparently there is white trash in Britain or England or whatever you want to call it. At age 17, Fred bought a motorcycle and then immediately went out and crashed it. He suffered a fractured skull as well as broken arms and legs. And then after the accident, Fred actually developed a fear of hospitals, which it's probably not the thing that he should have come to be scared of after a motorcycle accident, but whatever. And he started experiencing these severe mood swings, which, brain damage, whatever. 2 years later, Fred actually had another head injury when he fell 2 stories after a girl he groped knocked him off the fire escape, which he totally had that coming. In 1961, Fred's 13-year-old sister confessed to her mother that Fred had actually been raping her for several years and had actually gotten her pregnant. For some reason, that was not okay, apparently, even though Fred's dad had been raping, those girls all those years. But Fred was arrested a few days later and sent to trial, openly admitting to having molested several young girls over the years because he literally just thought that everyone was doing it. And that's exactly what he told the court. He's like, I thought everyone was doing it. I thought that was just normal, and whether he was telling the truth or not, I don't know, but that's what he said. Unfortunately, Fred's sister refused to testify at the trial, so the case was dropped. Despite that, Fred ended up being disowned by most of his family. A year later, Fred met Catherine Costello, who at the time was pregnant with a Pakistani taxi driver's baby. That's kind of important. I'm not just saying that to like shine a light on interracial relationships or whatever. Like that kind of plays in later. But Fred didn't care that Catherine was carrying a Pakistani baby, and the two got married 2 months later. After a brief stay in Coatbridge, the two moved to Glasgow, where they had 2 children of their own, Charmaine and Anna Marie. By 1964, Fred and Catherine were both openly cheating on each other. And when Fred came home to find Catherine in a naked wrestling match with a man named John McLaughlin, Fred walked over and punched Catherine in the face, which usually, a guy walks in on his wife cheating on him and he ends up punching the guy in the face, not the girl, but whatever. John, who based on his last name is probably some beefy Scottish guy, he was not about to let a husband strike his wife. And so in return, John punched Fred in the face. At that point, Fred whipped out his knife and slashed John across the stomach. And at that point, John just went ballistic and started wailing on Fred, who eventually retreated. Unfortunately, John couldn't kill Fred because then we could have avoided this entire story, but whatever. Over time, Fred, the two didn't get a divorce right after that, and Fred continued beating Catherine, who then just continued to let John come over and beat Fred in return. It was this weird back and forth that they had going on. Like, rather than get a divorce, Catherine kept cheating on him, Fred kept beating her, and then Catherine kept getting the guy that she was cheating on Fred with to come over and beat up her husband. It was weird. After accidentally running over a small child while working as an ice cream delivery man, Fred then picked up 2 young women, Isa McNeil and Anne McFall, and moved to Gloucester. By 1966, Fred had mental control over all 3 women in his life. He even began abusing his daughter Charmaine and then forced Catherine into prostitution to supplement their income. Also, Anne McFall then fell in love with Fred, and, Catherine and Isa were just a little less infatuated. So Catherine devised a plan for John McLaughlin to come rescue the family and take her and Isa back to Glasgow. McFall, who did not want that to happen at all, warned Fred that what was about to happen. However, the plan actually ended up working for the most part, with Catherine and Isa getting whisked back to Glasgow by John after one more just merciless beating of Fred. While Catherine was away in Glasgow, McFall then put the pressure on Fred to finally divorce Catherine so that Fred and McFall could get married. But Fred, was not interested at all. And in 1967, Anne McFall's pregnant remains were found at the edge of a cornfield. Although Fred was the prime suspect, he was never actually charged with her death. And even crazier than that, Catherine decided to reconcile and moved back in with Fred a month later. Unfortunately, that lasted for about a month before Catherine again changed her mind and left and went back to Glasgow. In 1969, Fred met 15-year-old Rosemary Letts, and this is where Fred, as if it wasn't bad enough already, this is where it starts to get absolutely insane. She's 15 years old. Fred is almost 30. He's almost twice her age. And at first, Rosemary was completely grossed out that Fred was hitting on her, but she eventually succumbed to Fred's sweet talking and kind gestures. And a few weeks later, Rosemary quit her job to become the nanny for Fred's 2 daughters. And Rosemary's parents were vehemently opposed to their relationship because, obviously she wasn't just being a nanny. The 2 were hooking up. And Rosemary's parents actually ended up sending social services after her to throw her into a juvenile home. And Rosemary eventually ran away from home permanently on her 16th birthday, and she reunited with Fred in the town of Cheltenham, I don't know, British. Fred also got his 2 daughters, who had also been taken by social services while Fred was serving a 30-day jail sentence for theft. Rosemary's parents, rightfully, smartly, still opposed the relationship, and when it was discovered that Rosemary had actually gotten pregnant from Fred, she was placed back into the care of social services. In In exchange for being released back out into the public, Rosemary agreed to get an abortion, which how is that an option? But whatever. Okay. And once she was out in public, she then recanted her decision and moved back in with Fred to have the baby. At that point, Rosemary's parents and the rest of her family just gave up and disowned her. And in December of 1970, Rosemary and Fred moved to Gloucester, where Fred was promptly arrested for stealing some tires. And so for the next 6 months, while Fred was in jail, 17-year-old Rosemary looked after Fred's 2 children, plus their new daughter, Heather Ann. Charmaine, Fred's daughter, mysteriously died before Fred's release in 1971. And no one's really sure how it happened, but all the signs point to the fact that Rosemary had actually murdered her. Fred found Charmaine's body in a coal cellar, but then eventually buried her in the backyard of their flat. At that point, Fred kind of found out how deranged Rosemary was, and he could not have been happier. Like, he finally found someone who truly understood just how screwed up he was. And when Catherine, his original wife, if you remember, showed back up in August to check up on her children, Fred just decided to strangle Catherine to death in the backseat of his Ford Popular. He then shoved a metal tube inside her just because. I don't know why. And when I say shoved a metal tube inside her, you know where it went. All right. He didn't shove it in her mouth. All right. Let's get real here. He then dismembered the rest of her body, placed the pieces in plastic bags, and then buried it around a tree on his property. In January of 1972, Fred and Rosemary got married, and then Rosemary got pregnant again. Their second child, May June, was born on June 1st the following year. And shortly after giving birth, Rosemary began working as a prostitute and using her headquarters in the upper rooms of their home so as not to disturb the children. Like, that's why she did it. Like it's like, honey, or, actually, you know what? Fred probably, encouraged her to do this, like he had done with Catherine, which I find odd. Like, he convinced his first wife to be a prostitute, but then was mad at her when he caught her. I guess, I don't know if, John McLaughlin was a paying customer, but I don't know. It just seems strange. But then she's just going to work as a prostitute upstairs. It's just like, okay, kids, mommy needs to go upstairs and do some work. I'll be back down later. Don't come upstairs. You'll regret it. But whatever. Rosemary, who actually seemed to be more insane than Fred was, actually took her sexual exploits as far as was humanly possible. Regardless of whether she was working with a man or a woman, Rosemary would push the limits just to see how far she could go with someone. She would suffocate her partners to the point of passing out, and on other occasions, she would insert as large of a foreign object as she could possibly find into her customers' bodies. And Fred, who was feeling like he had found the jackpot, began gathering a collection of bondage devices and pornographic items, which also included videos depicting bestiality and child abuse. Meanwhile, when they weren't doing all of that, Fred and Rosemary took great pride in assaulting their daughter and another girl named Caroline Owens, who was a 17-year-old girl they had hired as their nanny. After tying Anna Marie to a mattress, gagging her, and raping her, Rosemary leaned in and literally said this: "Everybody does it to every girl. It's a father's job." Nope, no, it's not. Nope, that's not true. That's not true at all. But good God, that's horrifying. Like, don't imagine it, even though you're going to imagine it right now because I told you not to. But that's, oh, God. Okay, anyway, sorry. Caroline Owens eventually was able to escape and confess to her parents everything she had witnessed and endured. And British police actually did their job. They immediately arrested Fred and Rosemary and charged them with all kinds of stuff. I mean, rape, torture, kidnapping, all kinds of stuff. But by the time the trial started, Owens couldn't deal with the pressure and mental anguish of testifying in court. And so, again, for the second time, the Wests, Fred West and then Rosemary were able to just go free. They paid a small fine for the trouble, I guess, and were able to just walk free again. 3 months later, the Wests met 19-year-old Linda Goff, and eventually convinced her to move in with them. A day after moving in, Goff disappeared. And when neighbors asked about her, the Wests said she had been asked to leave after she had hit one of their children. When When her dismembered body was found years later, police deduced that she had been suffocated to death after being suspended from wooden beams in the west cellar. Like literally day one, you're just going to hire someone and you're just going to start torturing them. Like don't even let them like finish reading the manual or whatever. I don't know. Maybe the manual was, hey, you're about to get tortured. Sorry. But whatever. Over the next year and a half, 9 more people were murdered inside the West home. And after murdering 18-year-old Juanita Mott in 1975, Fred decided to cover the cellar floor with concrete and converted that cellar into a bedroom for his oldest children. So, like, here's the thing. Like, his cellar, I guess, was like a dirt floor where he was burying all of his victims. And then he decides to cover it with concrete. So, A, his victims could never be found, ostensibly. And his oldest daughters would now just be sleeping on top of a bunch of dead bodies that their father had killed. Like, it's insane. By 1977, Rosemary's father had a change of heart and reconciled with Fred and Rosemary, his daughter. He and Fred even went into business together and tried to open a cafe, but that quickly went bankrupt. When Rosemary's father found out that his daughter was working as a prostitute, here you go. This is where it gets even crazier. He became a paying client, which, probably seemed ridiculous to Fred because he'd been having sex with his own daughters for free for all these years. Like, dude, you're doing it wrong. You're paying to have sex with your own daughter. Like, I think you can just do that. I'm pretty sure, like, my dad did it with his daughters. They never charged him. My daughters haven't charged me. Why are you letting, like, you need to get your parenting skills in order, mister. Like what? Oh God. Anyway, by the time Rosemary's dad started banging her, Rosemary had given birth to 8 children, at least 3 of which didn't even belong to Fred. But Fred was still a good guy and claimed all of them as his own, even though several of them had much darker skin. And when people asked him about this, Fred claimed that his great-grandmother was actually black, and that had somehow manifested itself into his children's appearance. None of that was true, but, he knew that people would probably not like the real answer. She's like, oh yeah, no, my wife's a whore. It's just 3 random guys' babies. It's fine. She likes black guys. Whatever. Sure. On August 5th, 1979, the Wests found 16-year-old Allison Chambers, who had recently run away from a children's home. And the couple convinced her to become a nanny for their kids, which, as you might guess by now, is not going to end well. Her dismembered body was also found in the garden near the Wests' home. After one more beating, Anna Marie ran away from home and got treatment for an ectopic pregnancy. Whatever that is. I think it's not good. I know that much. I just didn't research what that was real quick before I started this, and I'm not going to do it now because, if you're a woman listening to this, you know exactly what it is. If you're a dude listening to this, you just know it's bad. That's all that matters. So when Anna Marie ran away from home, Heather and Mae June then became Fred and Rosemary's new playthings. Fred forced his kids to watch porn with him and Rosemary and openly talked about how he wanted to get them pregnant. Like, what? Like, it's like, I love, go watch the telly, watch a couple people, get a little naked, do a little naked wrestling, then I'm gonna get you pregnant. I'm gonna stick a baby in you. Yeah. It's just like, ew. I'm sorry. That was in poor taste. I don't care though. Because it's going to get weirder. Fred and Rosemary's son, Stephen, was also encouraged to get in on the action, with Fred telling Stephen that he would have sex with his own mother before he turned 17. It's just like, oh, Stephen, you're going to get in on all this too. Before you're 17, you and your mother, you're going to get right up. That's a different British accent than the one I just did. Like, whatever. But gross, man. Like, that's so gross. And here's Fred would really deeply encourage this for some reason. And he often told his kids, he would just be like, I made you, I can do whatever I want with you. And no, that's not true. Like yes, you made your kids 100%. No one's gonna, fight you on that, maybe except for like the 3 darker ones that we're still kind of suspicious about. But like, sure, there's several here that are definitively yours. But because of laws and society and rules and stuff, you can't actually do whatever you want with your kids. Can you dress them up in fun little outfits? Sure. Can you regulate their diet so that they grow up strong and healthy? Absolutely. Can you have sex with them? No, you can't do that. Can you encourage them to have sex with each other? Also, no, you can't do that either. That's, there's a really hard line drawn there. And we just can't allow that. So in June of 1987, Heather finally disappeared. His daughter Heather finally disappeared. Neighbors and the other children, her siblings, were initially told that Heather had taken a job in the town of Torquay, but the story soon changed that Heather had run away from home, eloping with her lesbian lover, and then committing credit card fraud. Sure, of course. On several occasions, Fred and Rosemary actually persuaded someone they knew to act as Heather and perform fake phone calls with people just to, kind of ease suspicions. Over the next few years, eventually Fred just started joking with his kids that they would end up under the patio like Heather, which, indicates that he had forgotten all the lies that he had been told before. But because he wasn't satisfied with being the worst father in history, Fred then constructed a barbecue pit and a picnic table directly on top of where Heather had been buried so his family could eat on top of her grave. First, you guys were aware that Fred had murdered Heather, right? I didn't lead with that because I'm a good storyteller. And, I trust that you're all smart enough to pick up on that. But, to then build a barbecue pit and a picnic table and put it right on top of your own daughter's grave. It reminds me of the Bob Birchtold episode from episode 4, where just every few minutes, it's so ridiculous. You're just like, what? And, oh God. Anyway, on August 6th, 1992, police got a warrant for stolen property and searched the West house. They had been tipped off by a parent of one of the children's friends about the constant rape that was going on. And although police found 99 videos, pornographic videos, none of them contained footage of West raping his daughter. However, thankfully, the West children were placed into foster care while the investigation continued. Fred was eventually charged with 3 counts of rape and 1 count of buggery, which is the cute way that British people describe bestiality. Just like, "Oi there, I was down at the barn shagging the pigs, giving them a little bugger." I don't know. Anyway, I don't know how British people talk. Sorry. Rosemary was also charged with child cruelty and obstructing police. Anna Marie, their daughter, was happy to give all the statements that she possibly could to the police, detailing the years of abuse that she and her sisters had endured. When police asked to speak with Heather, who at this point, everyone except Fred and Rosemary thought was still alive, no one had any record of her existing. They couldn't find her, where Fred had said that she was. They couldn't find any new tax records or anything like that. However, again, for the 3rd time, someone refused to testify at the trial. And Anna Marie just could not do it. When the time came to testify in court, Anna Marie backed out and the case was dropped and the Wests walked free again. We were so close. Despite this obvious loophole in the British legal system, the kids remained in foster care and the police continued their own search for Heather. When police then learned that Catherine and Charmaine had been missing since 1971, they kind of started to wonder if Fred's statements about Heather being buried beneath the patio might actually be true, because their kids and Anna Marie had said hey, my dad kind of jokes about how Heather's buried beneath the patio, but he also said that she's off with her lesbian lover, so I don't know what to believe. On February 24th, 1994, police arrived at the West house with a search warrant for Heather's body. Although Fred insisted that Heather was alive and was involved in the drug cartel, the police, for the first time ever, were just unwilling to believe him. And the next day, Fred confessed to Heather's murder and allowed police to take him down to the station. Over the next month, Fred confessed to 9 killings and led police to the remains of all of the bodies. Rosemary was arrested on April 20th and charged with 2 murders. And in May, Fred and Rosemary were then jointly charged with 5 murders. On January 1st, 1995, unfortunately, well, I don't know. He deserved it. Fred choked himself to death in his jail cell by wrapping a rope that he had improvised out of blankets and laundry bags around his neck. Rosemary's trial began in October of that year, with her insisting that she was innocent of all charges. 7 weeks later, she was convicted of 10 murders and sentenced to life in prison. Anna Marie, in an effort to completely change her identity to avoid carrying the shame and embarrassment of her parents' actions, changed her name to Anne Marie, which, swing and a miss there. She was the only West child who ever visited Rosemary in prison, who, at least as of this recording, continues to maintain her innocence. The West's home, which came to be known as the House of Horrors, was demolished in 1996 and was developed into a public walkway. And that, thankfully, is the end of the story. Well, that was an ordeal. And, you made it. You made it through another really terrible story. So good for you. But, there's a lot of lessons to be learned. I still haven't figured out a good way to transition to this segment. Here's what we learned.
What did we learn?
Number one, it is actually a fact that not all parents have sex with their kids. And listen, if you're listening to this and you have grown up in a house where, you have sex with your parents, either against your will or, you're totally into it, that's not normal. All right. And, you don't have to keep doing it. People are going to think you're pretty weird. Number two, parents, just a friendly reminder here that just because you did indeed make your kids, there are certain things that you cannot do to them. You can't have sex with them. You can't murder them. You can't torture them. Just some general basic human decency things that you should probably, stay away from. So there's that. And number three, I don't know what happened to the rest of the West's children. They were a little bit better with coming up with new names. For example, May June did not change her name to May June. Like originally it was spelled M-A-E June, and she just, she didn't just change it to M-A-Y June because she's smarter than that. Anna Marie going from Anna to Anne Marie, just not a smart move there. If you're going to go into witness protection, completely different name. Like whatever you wish your name was, like that's the time to go for it. Don't just change one letter in your name. That would be silly. All right. Like that would be like if I went into witness protection and changed the spelling of my name from John to Jon. Like, no, that's not how it works. Next week on Our Weird World, it is one more terrible story. Not as bad as this one, but still really terrible. It is the story of Nathaniel Barjona, who was just a serial killer who just wanted to be bad and evil just because he could. And a lot of strange things happened in his story, and we will jump into it next week. So thank you again for listening. Sorry about this week. It was pretty bad. But tell all your friends if they're into really messed up stuff like this. And always remember, keep it weird.